Welcome back to 30 Days to Learn jQuery, and today we're going to be focusing on jQuery deferreds. And this is more of an advanced topic, but hopefully I can break it down so it's easy for everyone to understand. So firstly, if you'd like to learn a bit before you view this screencast, you can check out api.jquery.com and take a look at all of the various deferred methods that are available. Now, we won't be taking a look at all of these, but we will review a good handful of them. So to begin, let's figure out what the dilemma is. And this is something that we've touched on a bit in this course. So let's say we have a timeout, and this timeout is going to execute in 2 seconds. Now what we're going to do here is, let's just create a global variable. We'll call it myvar, and that will be undefined for the time being. Okay, so after 2 seconds though, we're going to do some kind of operation. This 2 seconds is going to simulate an Ajax request, anything like that. But when that's complete, we are going to set myvar equal to my value. And then at that point, we will log it to the console. Okay, let's view this in the browser. Load the page, wait a couple seconds, and in the bottom, you'll see my value has been logged. So now at this point, the dilemma is we can no longer access the value of myvar without running timeouts or figuring out maybe some kind of pub sub model. So if I change this to myvar in the timeout, and then below this, we try to log myvar one more time, we get undefined, and then in 2 seconds, once that value has been assigned to the variable, we have that available. So especially when you're learning, the dilemma is, how do I access the value of my var when I'm not actually setting its value until some point in the future? And again, this will be an Ajax request. You don't really know. It could be 100 milliseconds, it could be 2, but you want to continue on with that value. So what most generally do at first is, from that point on, they just continue writing their code inside of this callback function. And then they'll do something else, and they have another callback function. And you end up with all of this nested code because you're trying to make it so that certain bits of code don't execute until a callback or an Ajax operation has completed. So we've reviewed a couple solutions to this in the jQuery course. We looked over PubSub. And PubSub's definitely a way to solve this. Within here, we could publish some kind of announcement, and then outside of that code, we can subscribe to it. So if that's confusing to you, view the PubSub lesson in this course. But deferreds are a much nicer way to do this. So why don't we try this deferred method out? So we'll create a function, and this is mostly pseudocode, so we'll call it setVal. That will be the name of our function. And within here, we will create a new deferred. So we'll call it deferred equals a new jQuery.deferred. The new keyword, you can either leave that on. Some people think it's much more descriptive. It's easier to wrap their mind of. We're creating a new deferred. But you don't have to. If you leave it off, they will take care of it for you. So it's really not essential. Now we run our timeout. So I will copy all of this and paste it in like so, do a little bit of cleanup. There we go. So we set a timeout. In 2 seconds, we set the value of my var. And again, that would be some kind of Ajax request that we'll go over shortly. And then we need to announce that we are finished. So we have this deferred. Now we're going to resolve it. So we will say deferred.resolve. And there we go. So we've created a function setVal. Within this function, we create a new deferred, we set our timeout, we do whatever it is we need to do, and when we're done, we're going to resolve the deferred. And then finally, we need to return the deferred. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to return a limited version of the deferred. So we'll do deferred.promise. Now, promises are confusing until you get it. Think of this as this function's way of saying, I promise to let you know when the operation is complete. So it's saying, I promise to let setVal know when this is resolved. And by default, it's in a state of pending. It's pending, pending, pending. And at some point, we are complete. So it resolves. And then at that point, any callbacks that are attached will fire. So let's try it out now. We will run setVal. And now we need a way to say, and once that is done, then do this. So let's try a couple different ones. We'll say once that is done, there's a keyword, we will execute a function, and we'll say all done. Then we will log the value of my var. So let's try this out. I'll get rid of that old console and check it out in Chrome. Reload the page, give it a couple seconds, we get all done, and then we get my value. So let's add one space there, try it one more time. Reload the page, it waits 2 seconds, and then we get the value. So think of deferreds as a way to use multiple callbacks. So for example, maybe later in your code, you need to be able to do something again with this value. Maybe you have a handful of modules and each module needs to listen for when this particular deferred has been resolved and we have access to the value. Well, then later you could use done again. You can stack these callbacks. Even after the deferred has already been resolved, you can still attach these callbacks to fire. And if it has resolved, it'll just fire instantly. So this is a really nice way to specify when this function has run and it's been resolved, meaning it's complete, then do this. Now, what if we want to listen for when it fails? Okay, well, once again, you may do an Ajax request, maybe nothing is returned, and it has failed. Well, in that case, you would use, rather than resolve, you would use either a reference to reject, or you would call it like this, reject. Now, the done method will never fire. Done will only fire if deferred is in a state of resolved. And if you ever need to check that state, you can use deferred.state as a function. So now if we reload the page, I'll wait a couple seconds, but you're not going to see anything down here because the done callback never fired. So with that in mind, how do we fire a function when it fails? Well, we instead use the fail method. Done, fail, and always. One more time, it'll wait a couple seconds, and then, because it failed, we execute the callback that was attached. Now, what if we need to do something where a function will fire regardless of it? We want it to run whether it fails or whether it succeeds. Well, in that case, you use the always method, and that means I don't really care whether it passed or failed. I want to run this function on either condition. I'll reload the page, and in 2 seconds, it's going to fire, but if we resolve it as well, try it one more time, it's still going to fire. Now, what if we want to be able to chain these? So we can say, if it's resolved, run this function, but if it is rejected, run that function. Well, we can do it in 2 ways. I'll show you the manual way, and then I'll show you jQuery's helper way that we can do it instead. So we can say set val.done, then we're going to log console.log all done, and then we're going to chain this. So add another one, and we'll say dot fail. Then we run a function, failed. So let's try this one out. Load the page, give it a couple seconds, and we get all done. But if somehow maybe we have an if statement, if this, then we're going to resolve it. But if we did not get this, then we're going to reject it. Okay, let's try it now. Reload, give it just a couple seconds, and now we get failed. So this is how we can chain. If it's done successfully, then do this. If it fails, then do that. Well, jQuery makes this a little bit easier by giving us the then method. Let's take a look at the jQuery source. I'm going to search for deferred just a couple times. Here we go. And this is where we are creating the deferred method. We're extending jQuery core and we're adding this new deferred. And what I want you to take a look at is within the promise object right here. We have this then method. And take a look at what it's doing. It's simply running the deferred and it's executing its done callback. And then it's executing its fail callback. And that's pretty much what we're doing right here. So that means we can replace this with then. And then we'll accept the success callback as its first parameter and its fail callback as its second parameter. So we have then do this, then we'll do a comma and do the second parameter. So let's make this a little bit cleaner. There we are, that's a little more readable. So set val.then, if we pass one parameter, it will fire when the deferred resolves successfully. If we pass 2, this represents when it's resolved. The second one represents when it fails. So one more time, we run it. We get failed, but if we change this to resolve, the first parameter will fire. 1, 2, and then it fires and we get all done. Cool. So now that we have a basic understanding of deferreds, let's take a look at maybe a little more practical example. We're going to create a wrapper. We've been working with Twitter a lot, and the reason why is because its API is so simple to work with. We can do it in one line of code, and we don't have to worry about API keys if we just want to search the timeline. So let's see how we can do this. We're going to create a method, and we'll just stack it onto jQuery, and we'll call it search Twitter. And that'll be a function. And this method's job is to query the Twitter API. So we can run this. We already know how to do this from the last few lessons. The URL will be search.twitter.com/search.json. Now this time we're going to do it a little bit differently. Before, to make it as easy as possible to understand, we were adding the query directly to the URL. So we were doing query equals dogs, and the callback, so we could have a JSONP callback, equals question mark like that. And that's fine, but we can clean this up. Let's remove it all this time. and we're going to change it. And now we're going to pass that query through as data. And we can say the query is going to be equal to, and we'll hard code it in for now, dogs. Next, we need to specify, rather than doing callback equals question mark, we can say, let's set the data type to JSONP, and then jQuery will know how to deal with that. Now, for now, we're going to use that success callback that we've learned about. And we'll say console.log results, and that will accept the results. All right, let's run this. We will fire the method and see what we get. Reload the page. It's queried the Twitter API. We have the results, and we can see all of these items where the tweet references dogs. Cool, so that's dead simple. But what if we want to pass in the value that we're searching for? All right, well, let's accept the search, and we'll change dogs from being hard-coded to the value that the user passes in. And now we're going to search for cats. One more time, we reload the page, we get the object back, we get the results, we look at the first one, and now we're looking for things that reference cats. And we can see that it does. But the problem with this older model is that all of our logic now has to be placed within this success callback. And what if maybe other modules in our project need to do something with that data? Well, here we're really limiting it to this one method. And then you'd have to use maybe PubSub or some other technique to alert those other pieces of your code or the modules that this is completed. So let's instead use a deferred again. So I'm going to remove this success entirely. We will create a new deferred. This time we will call it DFD. This is fairly common for a new jQuery.deferred. Once again, new is optional. You don't have to include it. So now we're going to fire this Ajax request. We're going to get everything that references cats. And on success, we're simply going to resolve the deferred, dfd.resolve. But this time, we're not firing it instantly because we don't want it to resolve immediately. We only want it to resolve when the success method fires. So let's remove that like so. Finally, we're going to promise this search Twitter method that we will fire those callbacks when the deferred has been resolved. Return dfd.promise. So now if we load the page and I'll refresh, we're not going to get anything below, and we shouldn't. All we've done right now is set up a deferred, and we have resolved it, but we haven't done anything. So now let's say search.twitter, and then, or done, execute this function. The function will automatically be passed any arguments, so we can accept the results, and then we will log those to the console. One more time, load the page, and we get those results. But now we're not stuck into this Ajax method, and we don't have all of this indented code, and we can fire multiple callbacks. And what I mean by that is, let's say we call this outer, and that's going to be equal to jQuery.searchTwitter for cats. Now we can take this and say outer.then fire the results. Let's make sure that works. It does. And then later in the code, we can do it again. So later, maybe in a different module, something like that, we can say outer.then and console.log something else with the results. One more time, and you'll see that both of those have been registered. So when the deferred has been resolved, both of them fire, and they both can gain access to the results of that Ajax request. Pretty neat. Now the same thing, if you want to do error, you could do dfd.reject. And that way, if there was an error, you can pass the second parameter to then, or you can run .fail, and then you can execute some code in that case, maybe alerting the user that no results were returned. Now in this case though, we can clean some things up. By default with jQuery, its Ajax methods will automatically return a promise. And what that means is, if we're already doing Ajax and we know that returns a promise, why don't we get rid of this right up here, like so, and we will return that. So we will return ajax.promise. And now rather than success and error, we can remove that as well, and we clean up our code quite a bit. Reload the page, and we still get those two objects. And that's because the Ajax methods, including .get, getJSON, post, those are already rigged to use deferred, so we don't have to repeat all of that work. So what I want you to note is this time, we're running the Ajax method, but we're not bothering with the success and error methods. We are returning the promise. So within search Twitter, we have access to it within this outer variable. And now we can use outer.done or fail or always, or we can use the helpers like outer.then. So now that we know that these Ajax methods are already set up for working with deferreds, you might be wondering, well, when would I ever create a new deferred? And there's lots of different situations when you would. Let's comment all of this out right here, and we will start from scratch at the top. And now we're going to take a look at using deferreds with animations. So let's create a couple boxes. So let's create a div with the class of box, my box, and let's just create 3 of them. Now we'll style them, give them a width and height of 200 pixels, a background color of green, and set their display to inline block, and give them some margin on the right. Let's see how that looks. Now we have 3 boxes, and what we want to do is incrementally fade each one out. And ultimately what we want to do is fire a callback once all of those animations have been completed. So let's take our first stab at this. We will grab the elements with the class of box, but we're going to limit this to the divs, and we'll get a little performance improvement there. And let's just try fading out maybe over a second. What's going to happen there? Well, they're all going to fade out. So we want them to fade out sequentially. Okay, well, how could we do that? Well, instead, let's change this to each and iterate over them. And now we're going to get the element, and we're going to use a common trick where we delay. And we can say delay for 1 second times the index. So the index for the first box will be 0, then 1, then 2. So we're going to say delay for 1000 times I, and then increment that. So that way, the first one will delay for 1000 times 0, the next one will delay for 1000 times 1, then 1000 times 2, then fade out over a second. Let's try that out. Reload the page, it fades out, it fades out, it fades out. But now we want to figure out how can we run an operation when all of those have completed. Well, we could try it here. Let's see, console.log done. Will that work? Nope, we're getting done immediately. Well, what if we're doing it outside? Will that work? One more time. Nope, that's running immediately. So it doesn't seem like there's any real way to figure this out. And we can by using promises. So check this out. We can say, get the divs with the class of box, delay them, fade them out, and then we can say promise to let me know when you're done, and when you are done, then execute this function, all animations have fired. Let's try it in the browser. Reload, 1, 2, 3, and then notice at the very end, all animations have fired. So don't let that promise keyword confuse you. Just think to yourself, it's a promise to let you know when they have completed. So when all of the animations related to the div have completed, then execute this. And from that angle, it's very readable. Promise to let me know when you're done. When you are done, run this function. Now we can also use another method called jQuery.when. And this is where we can stack multiple asynchronous operations. So for example, we can say when all 3 of these Ajax requests have completed and we have the results, only then do I want to proceed. Up until now, we've just been saying when this one is done, then do this. But now we want to say when all of these are done, then do this. And jQuery.when is the correct choice for that. So let's create a function here, and we'll say get tweets, since we've been working with Twitter. And once again, we're going to return a request to the Twitter API URL. The data we'll send through will be the query will be equal to whatever the user passes in. And we're going to be working with JSONP again, so we'll set that to JSONP. So when this function is called, it's going to fire a request to the Twitter search API. It's going to pass in a query, and it's going to return those results. All right, let's try this. We will say when get tweets, we'll look for dogs, and then this could be another Ajax request, or we're just going to call the same thing and look for cats. Now we can say when both of those are done, then run a function. And now we can have the results from each using results 1, results 2, whatever you want to call it. We'll duplicate that and replace it. Let's try this out now. I'll load the page, and notice now we get both of those results. Let's see, the first one we have references to, if we scroll down, dogs. And let's go down to the second one, and now with here, we have results for cats. So isn't that really amazing? We can specify only when all of these asynchronous operations have completed, only on that condition do I want you to fire the results. And the done method will accept, in order that they were referenced, any results that are available. All right, and that's going to do it for today. Deferreds are definitely something that's a little difficult to wrap your mind around of, but once you do, it clicks. It's like anything else. Once you get it, you know it forever. So let me know if you're still really confused about this. You can go to tutsplus.com/forums, or again, you can tweet me at Jeffrey_Way if you need any clarification or more examples. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.